Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today for this edition of for IRENA Insights webinar series. My name is Martina Lyons and I'm from the IRENA Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, let me introduce you to IRENA and to our webinar series. We are an intergovernmental organization. We have currently 163 member countries. We welcome Austria in the beginning of the year, and there are another 21 countries in their accession process. We support countries in their transition to a sustainable energy future and serve as the principal platform for international cooperation, center of excellence, and a repository of policy, technology, resource, and financial knowledge on renewable energy. And since our analytical work and our engagement with our members generates a lot of valuable insights, we are constantly looking for more ways to share those insights with you. And that is why we launched our fortnightly IRENA Insights webinar program back in January 2020, so way before the pandemic drove the proliferation of online events. So every other week, presenters from one of IRENA teams, alone or with their invited guests, as is the case today, will share with you key findings from their latest work. They will offer insights into opportunities, trends, best practices, but also innovative solutions how to address various challenges. While there are many other longer deep dive webinars out there, we aim to keep these webinars short. So they last approximately 30-40 minutes, so we cannot cover everything. But the idea is to give you enough to decide whether to delve deeper into the topic. And we signpost in our presentations further sources of more in-depth information to help you to do that. Next slide, please. So East and Southern African countries possess vast potential for renewable energy development. In the crucial years ahead, coordinated regional plans will play an important role in scaling up the use of renewables for power generation, but also strengthen regional power supplies, meeting national climate commitments, and ensuring energy security. Today's webinars, titled Planning and Prospect for Renewable Power, Eastern and Southern Africa. During this webinar, our speakers will share with you key findings from the report of the same name, which is the 5th report in the series. We will hear about the assessment of the renewable power investment potential within the landscape of regional power sector developments through 2040 in Eastern and Southern African power pools. This analysis is IRENA's input to the Program Infrastructure Development for Africa and to the Africa Continental Power Systems Master Plan, to which IRENA contribute as the modeling partner. Very timely topic considering all the changes the world is going through. This will be presented by Mr. Tichakunda Simbini, the energy infrastructure experts from the African Union Development Agencies, and Ms. Asami Miketa, who is IRENA's leading experts on energy planning. Their presentation will last approximately 20-30 minutes to allow another 10 minutes for your questions. But before I hand over microphone to our speakers, just a few housekeeping items to share. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is recorded as usually, and we will be available together with the presentation slides on IRENA's webinar website under past webinars. We will be sharing with you the link to the website also in the follow-up email. Just for information, all previous webinars, webinar recordings and slides are already there. All of you are currently muted and will remain so throughout the webinar. Next slide, please. So we would love to hear from you during today's webinar and presentation. So if you have any questions to our speakers, please send it to us through the question feature that you can find on the webinar panel. We will be monitoring questions throughout the session and select some to be answered by our speakers. Due to time constraint, we apologize in advance if your question is not answered. To be able to reflect on the delivery of our webinars and way to improve it, and also what else to cover in our future edition, we would appreciate your feedback. So at the end of the webinar, and then again in the follow-up email, we will share with you a link to a very short satisfactory survey, which we invite you to complete. We are monitoring your comments and we work on selecting topics of your interest and trying to shift times of webinars to accommodate various time zones. And last but not least, if you experience any technical difficulties, please try to reconnect by dialing in via phone. You can get the number by clicking on the phone option located on the webinar panel. Otherwise, please visit support service on the GoToWebinar website. And now, without any further ado, let me kick things off by welcoming Asami and Teach. Asami, over to you.
Thank you, Martina. Can I have my slides, please?
Next slide, please.
Yes, so thank you very much, everyone, for joining this webinar. I'm happy to present our latest report on the IRENA's Africa modeling work that we have been working since last 10 years. And this is the latest publication. As Martina mentioned, this is the 5th publication in the series. And this publication was published just a few weeks ago. And this analysis is concerning the African, Eastern and Southern African power pool countries, and it includes 21 African countries. And I am presenting this on behalf of my team because this work has started quite a while ago, a few years ago, and many colleagues, including the former colleagues, have contributed to it. And I am going to focus on the high-level findings from the report, and then we'll hand it over to Tish to discuss the relevance of this work in the context of energy infrastructure development in Africa. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I would actually like to start with discussing the benefit of long-term planning. So we organized this seminar 5 years ago at the sideline of assembly, where we discussed why long-term planning is important and what are the components of good planning. And one thing that was really highlighted was that plans are not so important, but planning is the important because planning refers to the process. And I come back to that because this point is very relevant for the ongoing discussion of the Continental Master Plan development, which Tish is going to touch upon. And so here there's a list of benefits that we discussed. What is striking here is that the benefit of long-term planning, of course, lies in the long-term, to have the longer-term investment decision correct. So we can avoid the short-sighted investment that is actually in the long term, not the cost optimum, or the policy is not very consistent. However, what we wanted to emphasize is that the benefit of long-term planning also comes in the short term. For example, having the long-term plan can actually help to reduce uncertainty in policy directions and project selection, which is the kind of aspects that investors are very much appreciating. So there's a clear benefit in the short term, and even much shorter term is that it can also speed up the service delivery. So what I mean by service delivery is that when you get finance from the banks, for example, they do need to have due diligence. And if you do not have any proper planning, that has to be done at the beginning. So that was a good point that was mentioned by financial institutions. So I would just like to highlight that we talk about long-term plans, but it's not just the benefit is in the long term. It is the short-term and the mid-term benefit that we are looking at. Next slide, please. So we talked about the benefit of good planning. So we have a differentiation of just planning and good planning. And the discussion there had come up with some components of what are the good planning. And we came up with 3 points. So data and narratives, it's important to have a very good updated the data and narratives that surround the analysis, and also transparent methodology that everyone can look and everyone can replicate. and then also to have a good planning governance and to own the capacity of the planning. And IRENA's support to IRENA members actually focuses on these 3 items. So we would like to support our countries to do better planning by helping in these areas. So for example, in the case of data and narratives, we have a very good renewable energy cost data. So we work with the costing team to come up with the best cost assessment. Also, we have also very good resource data. So we use important cost data and resource data as a key input to the planning process. And in terms of transparent methodology, so this is the focus of this presentation. We developed a modeling tool for to be used by the countries in Africa, so that the decision for investment can be assessed through the formal quantitative evidence-based analysis. And then the third point is the capacity building. I'll come back to this point later, but we developed these tools as a starting point to provide capacity building. Next slide, please. So long-term planning has been applied in many countries in Africa. And in Africa, there are 5 African power pools, and 3 of 5 African power pools actually published their master plan. And the latest master plan that was published from the Eastern African power pool was in 2014. From the Southern African power pool was 2017. And the Western African power pool was from 2018. So let us focus on the Eastern African power pool and Southern African power pool. So there are not just one scenario presented in this master plan, but these are the main scenario for EAPP and so-called benchmark case for the Southern African power pool. So what is really striking is quite heavy fossil investment. So if we are to go for this load, then we are to have quite big investment in coal, for example. So our analysis started from this. Do we really need this all coal investment? Can you go to the next slide, please? So what we see in Africa, next slide, please.
There are little internet issues today, so we have
no problem. Yes. So this is the renewable energy uptake in Africa last 20 years. So despite the big planned investment from the master plans, we actually see quite an uptake of renewable energy in the past 10 years, particularly driven by non-hydro renewable energy, particularly solar and wind. So you can see that from 2010, the pace of introduction of solar and wind has really speeded up, and that has really driving the investment on the renewable energy. Please go to the next slide, please. And in fact, still the penetration, the speed of introduction of solar and wind is not at the same speed as we see elsewhere. But what I wanted to highlight is that in the continental level, maybe it's not as fast as the other region, but we are seeing the signs in selected countries in Africa where more non-hydro renewables are adopted. So these are some of the countries that I picked with quite significant increase in the share of non-hydro renewables in Africa. So we see that if there is a good conducive environment, there is opportunity for the whole continent to benefit from the non-hydro renewable energy. Please go to the next slide, please. So with this observation, we use so-called SPLAT model to develop alternative scenarios. So the SPLAT model is IRENA's long-term investment model that is built using the IAEA's Atomic Energy Agency's message framework. And we have built the renewable energy and power sector infrastructure database into the modeling framework. And the first years are calibrated according to the master plan. And we analyzed each and every 47 African countries, continental African countries. And this, what I'm presenting now, is for 21 countries that belongs to the Southern and Eastern Africa. And the assumption that we adopted here is that investment options are, we included pipeline projects, and we included also the committed project. We also included renewable energy as renewable energy zones, which are characterized with high potentials. And we also assess the cost assumptions. As I mentioned, we have a good costing team behind us. So we worked with the costing team to come up with good prospects for the African renewable energy cost trend. And then we also assess the cross-border interconnections. We developed 5 scenarios, but because of today's nature of this presentation, I am going to focus only one scenario, which is our main scenario. Please, next slide, please. So we developed these scenarios almost the same as a master plan scenario with 2 major exceptions. One exception is that we identify the renewable energy resources as zones. So we have done quite extensive analysis assessing different zones and investment potentials. And we identified 350 zones across the 21 countries, and we explicitly modeled these options. These different sites are characterized with different generation potential, different investment needs in terms of the distance to the grid, distance to the nearest load. So these are kind of very innovative approach that we are quite happy that we are presenting today. Next slide, please. And also we use this cost assumptions that come from the costing team. So as many of you who might have joined our earlier Insight seminar series, globally, we have been observing quite significant cost reduction for the solar PV last 10 years, 87%, CSP 79%, offshore wind 47%, onshore wind 32%. So there's a quite significant cost reductions. And on the right side, we have shown our assumptions and the master plan assumptions. So these, on the left side is the LCOE, on the right side is the investment cost. The bars, the gray range corresponds to the assumption that are adopted in the EAPP and the Southern African Power Pool Master Plan. The Southern African Power Pool Master Plan used the constant cost assumption for the solar and PP, whereas Eastern African Power Pool assumed there are some reductions. And we assess the cost for different sites. And we have modeled each and every site for different costs. And the cost difference are related to the different turbine size and different distance to the grid. Therefore, the need for the additional investment for the grid connection. Next slide, please. So you can see that our assumptions are actually quite lower compared to the master plan assumptions. So this is the result of the analysis. What we find is that compared to the, if we use the different cost assumptions and different renewable energy resource potential, that is quite with high resolution, so to say, we see that actually renewable energy have cost optimally introduced much more than the master plan renewable energy representation. So as I mentioned, in the master plan, there are other scenarios. Both Eastern African Power Pool and the Southern African Power Pool has the renewable energy scenarios. And in the Southern African Power Pool, the 10% of variable renewable energy penetration by 2040, and Eastern African Power Pool is 18%. So compared to this, our analysis shows that it can actually go much higher than what even the most renewable oriented scenarios from these master plans shows. And this figure shows that the installed capacity projections from our analysis. So it shows that by 2040, the solar investment would be cost optimally up to 134 gigawatt, and for wind, it's nearly 100 gigawatt. And I also want to point out that existing plant and committed plant are represented in this scenario, and they actually alone make up 180 gigawatt by 2025. And then please go to the next slide, please. And in the next 3 slides, I very quickly just talk through what are the highlights of what are the implications of these scenarios. Just a highlight. Please, the next slide, please. Yes. So one important aspect is that the electricity mix of different countries get very much diversified because of all these new solar and wind investment. If you, I did not show the current energy mix or electricity mix for these countries, but most countries actually rely on 1 or 2 sources. And maybe at the power pool level, it might look more diversified. But if you look at in this way, by country, actually the great diversity is brought into each country's energy mix. So that's one of the benefits of having this having more solar and wind. Please, next slide, please. And then other aspect is that we have actually done quite extensive analysis on the trade potential. So the trade actually benefits the introduction of renewable energy because that allows us to lock the flexibility options that can be actually brought by the hydropower. So the hydropower can actually work as a flexibility option within a country and also within the region. So that's the point that I wanted to make. And another point is that more and more bi-directional electricity transfer is happening rather than just unidirectional electricity transfer. So that's another aspect of having more valuable renewable energy in the system. Please go to the next slide, please. And then as a result of this analysis, we have kind of highlighted some of the potential zones that we think from the analysis shows as a good potential areas for investment. I would like to highlight that it's not for IRENA to suggest that these are the good investment options. You should look into that, but it's more for us to suggest that in the planning process, these zones can be assessed with more attention. For example, in the PIDA process that we mentioned, there is very little attention paid for the solar and wind energy. So we hope that this kind of analysis would bridge the gap of not paying enough attention to this new solar and wind, and more benefit can be brought by more properly looking into these options in the planning process. The next slide, please. This is my last slide. So the reason why we are doing this is because we wanted to use this for capacity building. So we are not suggesting that this is the options that you have to consider, but we are just transferring the knowledge of how the planning can be done. Sorry, please, next slide, please. So there's still some gap.
Yeah, there are some issues, but hopefully it will be solved quickly.
Okay, so I just speak about what I wanted to present. So we wanted to be helpful. Thank you very much. Now we have the last slide. So we have been supporting energy planning in Africa through the bilateral engagement with countries. For example, we worked with Eswatini in developing master plan. We also worked with the West African power pool countries to develop a regional model analysis and planning. And we are currently working with the Central African power pool members and the Secretariat to jointly build a model through the capacity building. And now I'm very happy to announce that IRENA's SPLAT model has been selected as an official modeling tool together with the IAEA's message planning tool. And this is going to give us more opportunity to engage with countries and members of the power pool to develop jointly the Continental Power System Master Plan. So with this, I would like to hand it over to Tish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Asami, for that presentation. Before I say my few remarks, I'm not going to make a presentation, but rather say just a few remarks to complement Asami's presentation. Martina, just confirm how many more minutes I have so that I know how to pace myself.
So within 10 minutes, 8-10 minutes.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, no, that's excellent. So my name is Tichakunda Simbini. You can call me Tich. I work for the African Union Development Agency, and I'm currently coordinating activities that we do under the in the energy sector, but also more broadly in infrastructure. So I think Martina mentioned in a presentation in the opening remarks that we are currently experiencing a number of global challenges, and some of them, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, which is causing us to have this meeting virtually, and also issues around climate change and more broadly development issues around poverty eradication and all these other challenges that gives us, all of us, sleepless nights. But in the midst of all this, we also have some socio-economic transformation that are coming, that are happening around us through the technological revolutions induced by the fifth industrial revolution. And you'll notice that unlike the other industrial revolutions, the first, second, and fourth industrial revolution, which were dictated by single or few technological advances, like for example, if it was steam development in electricity, the coming in of the transistor, the IC, as well as the internet later on. Unlike this period that we live in, there are multiple advances that are taking place at the same time. And just to mention a few, I mean, robotics, we've got artificial intelligence, blockchain, the Internet of Things, biotechnology, but most importantly, also for the first time in the energy sector, we have that revolution that is taking place. And this is what Asami has just presented. that for the first time now in our existence, we now have the tools to be able to address some of the challenges that we are experiencing on the continent. And one of those pressing issues that we are faced with is the low access to energy. And Asami, in her presentation, just showed the advances that has taken place in the reduction in the cost of renewable energies, which then give member states, our member states, different options to look at in terms of our attempts to address the shortages in energy and the limited energy access, which then stifles our aspirations to create employment on the continent through more broad-scale industrialization. And I think Asami mentioned that because of the assessment, as you can see from the report, countries now have the opportunity to diversify their energy mix. So as a result, from our side, as more broadly through the African Union, we are working on the Africa single electricity market, and through our partners, which the support of our partners, which includes the European Union, the African Development Bank, UNECA, IRENA, IAEA, and our broader partners, which include the USAID and other partners as well. So the aim is for us now to be able to fully exploit all the energy resources that are available on the continent, so that we can then spur our development. And an important component of that aspiration to develop an Africa single electricity market is the Continental Power Systems Master Plan development, which Asami mentioned in the conclusion of a presentation. And under that Continental Power Systems Master Plan development, we will look at identify priority hard infrastructure projects that will be essential for us to develop regional trade within power pools, such as what is happening in the Southern African power pool and being planned also in East African, West African, and Central, as well as North African power pool. And this will then lead us to the next level of the development, where we will link power pools so that they can be, for the first time, trade between power pools. And in the long term, we anticipate that we will then transition to a stage where we will be able to trade electricity between the African continent, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. And that is part of our long-term aspirations. However, I must also mention, and Sami mentioned in a presentation, that in this endeavor we remain technology neutral. However, but we will be informed by the best evidence that is before us in terms of the right energy mix. And also and this report that Sami has just presented is one of those reports that will inform member states on the best options that are available to them. And we are already beginning to see this happening. Like if you look at the West African power pool, for the first time, it has more renewable energy projects that have been prioritized by the member states. And we also see the Southern African power pool now also trying to update their 2018 master plan to include some of the renewable energies. And this report also comes at an important time when the East African power pool is updating their master plan, and hopefully they will take on board these recommendations from this report. So for us, as we develop the Continental Power Systems Master Plan and all other flagship infrastructure programs on the continent, these will be informed by the priorities of the member states, but also which will then be encapsulated in the regional master plans, and then which will then feed into the Continental programs, such as the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, and also the Continental Transmission Master Plan that we are developing. And hopefully, we will see some of the recommendations that have been recommended in the ASEC report being adapted by the member states and filtering into the regional plans and ultimately into the continental master plans and initiatives. So I think Asami also mentioned that the power pools, after reviewing all the options that are available for us in terms of the tools that we can use for modeling, they endorsed the selection of SPLAT as well as the message, and also ultimately, of course, the selection of IRENA and IAEA as the preferred modeling partners for the second phase of the development of the Continental Transmission Master Plan. And this Continental Transmission Master Plan has got a very heavy component that we'll look at more broadly in terms of energy planning and modeling, but we will also look at the updating of the regional power pool master plans, and we will have a component that will look specifically on renewable energies and energy storages and other emerging issues that are pertinent for our aspirations as the African continent, for us to be able to fully exploit the energy resources that we have on the continent to for the socio-economic development of the African citizens. And so I think in that regard, the energy planning and modeling, as well as the capacity building that will be done by IRENA through this program, of course, with the broader cooperation of and support of our other partners as well that I've mentioned, the EU, the African Development Bank, we will be able to jointly anticipate the future and then try to model and see how we address our future problems, and so that we can then start to develop solutions that are tailor-made for us to be able to achieve our aspirations as a continent. So I think with these few remarks, I think this is the beginning for us, and we will be building and strengthening our relationship with IRENA as well as IAEA, especially on this front of energy planning and modeling through the tools that they have developed over the years, and also these reports and the resources that they've been also developing. And hopefully this will be filtered to the member states so that they can then ultimately be included in the continental initiatives. So I think with these few remarks, I think this gives you a broad overview of our plans, how it fits into the ASEC report, and how we are going to be cooperating with the IRENA and IAEA and our other partners in terms of making sure that we help the member states to evolve with these opportunities that are before us, and these tools that have come about as a result of the technological advances that are happening all around us, so that at least we will then be able to compete globally, and most importantly, to provide opportunities for the growing youth that are coming online, and I mean in terms of creating jobs for our youth and the growing population on the continent. And so thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Teach, and Asami, if I can invite Asami, and thank you all for staying with us. Teach, come back. Thank you for staying with us. We received a couple of questions. We will try to answer. We bundle some of them to some of the questions. We will have 4, so 2 and 2 for our speakers. So please stay with us. I will start with Asami. There were a lot of questions related to the model, so let me capture all these questions in this one question. So how open is the message SPLAT model? And can the source code be analyzed and changed? Is the data open, available without NDA? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. So it is open access. It's not open source in a way that you can edit the code. But you can actually develop different models using this SPLAT model. And IRENA has a website where you can actually sign the agreement form, and then we can share that that models easily. And we are also transferring the model with the African member countries through the Continental Master Plan project. And we hope that what we have been developing will be more and more used by African member countries.
Thank you, Asami. We can add more links to all the answers we have in the presentation, and it will be then uploaded on the website. Thank you, Asami. To teach, you touch upon it, but could you please elaborate more about the envision process for the Continental Master Plan? Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. So so let me just step back a little bit. We started this process in 2020, where we developed a baseline study, and that baseline study then defined the scope of work for the second phase, which then started in January. And so what we will do in this second phase is that the first part was the adoption of the common modeling tool and the modeling partners, which is IAEA and IRENA. And then starting from the 17th of May, we will be training the selected participants from the power pools on the use of the message and SPLAT. And that will be done in two parts. The first training, like I mentioned, in May, and then the second training in July. And then after that, we will then devolve that training to regional power pools. And then once we've done the capacity building at regional power pool level, we'll then start developing models from the power pools, which will then be consolidated into a continental model. And then we will then do some scenario analysis and optimization. And that then will then lead us to the selection of the identification of the priority infrastructure projects. And through this modeling, we want to try and see, like Asami presented in a presentation, the potential sources of energy, the demand centers, and the potential energy flows, the infrastructure that is essential for us to be able to create that continental market, and also look at the dynamic stability issues that are surrounded that associated with interconnecting power pools. And then also ultimately identify the priority infrastructure projects for that. So that process will take about 2.5 years. And so we are in this for the long haul. And of course, after that, we'll then start working with the regional power pools and the member states to then to facilitate the implementation of those priority infrastructure projects. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the second one and the last one for Asami. So you presented quite high penetration of solar and wind, but as we know, they are variable. So how can we tackle the issue of integration of variable renewable energy into the grid without compromising reliability of supply? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. So I just need to highlight that the SPLAT model is not for everything. On energy planning, we have to use different kind of tools, and the different tools have different purposes. And the SPLAT model has a purpose of coming up with a long-term vision, and then that has to be followed by more detailed analysis that looks into the shorter term, that looks into much more elaborated grid representation. For example, IRENA has a team that looks into the dispatch potential, that checks the flexibility, whether the flexibility of power system is sufficient in order to have proper, in order to have the reliable power system. So that's analysis that would be good to have in addition to the SPLAT analysis. And followed by that, we would also recommend that in the near-term future, you would also need to have like network analysis, which also IRENA has a team to do that. And it's very important that we do all this process in a consistent and coherent manner. But in terms of the our SPLAT model analysis and how the valuable renewable energy is treated, we did take quite conservative approach. For example, that we assessed that solar and wind does not contribute to the reserve margin, which is very conservative and which is kind of penalizing the solar and wind. But in order for us to be more on the conservative side, we took quite strong assumption on these. So if we are to do more detailed analysis following this, we may actually have even more renewable energy potential that is cost optimally involved. So this analysis is just a starting point, and whenever we work with country, we try to present it in a more comprehensive way.
Thank you very much. And Tish, one last question for you. If you can share with us, what are the challenges for the establishment of the single Africa electricity market? Thank you.
So that would take I mean, the whole day to discuss the challenges. Let me start with the opportunities. If you look at the energy resource potential endowment of the continent, they are vast. And so I think, and that is why we are saying that we should then develop this the continental electricity market, so that we can then exploit those resources that cannot be exploited outside of regional as well as a continental electricity market. So when it comes to the challenges, you find that the continent is big and diverse, and you have different regions which are at different stages of development in terms of their regional integration as well as electricity power trade. And that's the first thing. The second thing is that you have multiple stakeholders that you now have to work with. And also, I think as we develop this, we have to think about the long-term sustainability of all this. So I think we tried as much as possible to anticipate these challenges, and these were then used now to design the second phase of the baseline study. For example, we came to the conclusion that it's important that we should build similar capacity in terms of energy planning and modeling for the power pools. And that capacity is to reside in the power pools after this exercise is done, so that we can then continuously update the models that are going to be developed after this. This is why we then decided to partner with IRENA and IAEA, because they've got the tools, they've got the footprint on the continent, and they've got the expertise to then continuously provide that capacity building going forward. So these are some of the challenges which I think are pertinent to this discussion, but I think they are broader challenges that can not be exhaustively discussed in this forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that's the end of our short Q&A session. Thank you both very much for sharing with us key takeaways from your work on long-term energy planning and all the challenges and opportunities which come together with this. And equally, thank you all for listening, for your questions, and for joining us today. We want to leave you with final announcement. So as mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, we will be sharing a link to a very short satisfactory survey with you, which will appear at the end of the webinar on your screen, and also the link will be shared with you in the follow-up email, and we thank you in advance for completing it. And we are lining up several other webinars which we will be posting on our website in the coming days, so please stay tuned. And that is all from us for today. Once again, thank you to our speaker Tijan Asami, and thank you all for joining us today and for your questions, and we look forward to seeing you in our next editions. Goodbye and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.